Ms. Marvel is a charming show, and I love being immersed in Pakistani-American culture, and now just Pakistan itself with today's episode, including learning so much about Pakistan's history, in particular, the partition of 1947. I had never heard of that before, and I thought it was really interesting when they introduced it last week or the week before, but we're really stuck on that. I hope that it pays off. I am enjoying learning about it, to be clear. But charming and educational, they just ain't enough in today's ultra-competitive streaming market, and not when you're part of a large franchise. A franchise that has succeeded, specifically because all the pieces are supposed to connect to the whole. That's the MCU formula. So if something in the MCU does not participate in that formula, it's at a severe disadvantage, not only in terms of audience interest, but in the success of the character that's front and center. And I worry about Kamala Khan. I want Kamala Khan to succeed. But the MCU ain't helping her. Each story, whether it's on the big screen or the small screen in the MCU, is supposed to not only tell its own story, but it's supposed to contribute to the bigger picture. That's why people come back for every entry, because it's supposed to pay off. You can't have it start. That's the whole problem DC is having. These things shouldn't be skippable. And when it comes to Disney Plus shows, they need to give you a reason also to watch them when they drop. I think the same thing to some degree for the movies, to watch them in theaters. So far, the movies have kept that. But the Disney Plus shows, particularly, I'm sad to say, Ms. Marvel isn't giving viewers a reason to watch this when it drops at 3 a.m. That's the whole point of the insane drop time. You're like, well, I mean, for some of you, it's a perfectly normal drop time. But for the United States and even the West Coast where it's midnight, this is a crazy, and also dropping first thing in the morning over in Europe, this is a crazy drop time, but it's supposed to be appointment television. You arrange your schedule around the drop of these shows because they're supposed to be so hot. So they gotta be hot, or the whole thing's just stupid. It had seemed like maybe Ms. Marvel was on the right track, by the way, dropping hints about King-O and the 10 rings from Shang-Chi last episode. But today's episode was a giant step back into Marvel Netflix territory, where back when the shows couldn't connect to the larger MCU because Kevin Feige, quite frankly, hated Jeff Loeb, who was then the head of Marvel Television. And then Kevin Feige said yoink and took it over himself. And at first he was like, Kevin Feige was killing it in TV, but now it's like, not so easy, is it? And once again, I'm disappointed that representation is not being done well enough, because therefore it's poorly received, which leads to certain groups being able to argue that the general public doesn't want representation, which I don't feel is the case. The public wants great stories, and it's Hollywood's job to tell stories with different protagonists, but to make sure that the quality is there so that people continue to be interested. Hollywood has a responsibility to do representation right, because then it's more than just losing money. They're letting down an entire group of people. And that's, Hollywood might be like, well, I didn't agree to that. Tough luck. That's the gig. You have a responsibility there. So for today's breakdown, first, because it's time. First, I'm going to lay out the problems with Ms. Marvel as a business venture and the Disney Plus shows in general, because this is show business. And then we'll talk about this charming episode 4. First off, Disney Plus needs to break its 6-episode formula, because not only is it not working, but it's becoming obvious with the latest shows. The cracks, the seams are showing. Great first episode to get everybody interested, then a really weak 2 to 4, which often will seem rushed, and then a strong finish with episode 5 and 6, trying to pull the audience back in and get excited about another season. You're like, well, this season wasn't so good, but the next season seems great. Come on. Right? But as far as tricks goes, that's a very good one, because we keep following, the next one's going to be real good, damn it. And I don't want to miss it because maybe it won't follow the formula. I think the earlier Marvel shows didn't quite have this problem as much because they were so connected to the MCU that we got lots of Easter eggs in those middle, weaker episodes that made up for them not being as good. But Moon Knight, Ms. Marvel, Boba Fett, and Obi-Wan, this is affecting Star Wars as well, they all have the same problems. I think even Hawkeye suffered from this a bit, but got a huge assist from Yelena, who got blipped. That was a big deal. That was great. And then also the return of Kingpin, even if we did not like the new Kingpin that we got. But it was a big deal that he was back. But again, Easter eggs. And I wish that Ms. Marvel had that. It's so disappointing to me that the powers that be at Marvel don't look at the outline for the series and go, that's charming. What a great story. I'm so excited for you to tell it. But you've done absolutely nothing to make this competitive in the superhero space. So could you please go back in and layer in tweetable moments for each episode and some guest stars to connect it to the larger MCU? Please, and for your own sake, because I'm sure you would like a season 2. And Ms. Marvel's villains, by the way, are absolutely awful. The ClanDestine have no powers and look like they came straight, and they have those stupid weapons that they're able to deploy. I'm like, what kind of action figure cheap garbage is this? And it looks like they came straight out of Iron Fist. Forget Daredevil, we're talking Iron Fist here. And by the way, Iron Fist did eventually get cool right before it was canceled at the end of season 2 when Iron Fist got an upgrade, and then of course some other, we had some other people getting an Iron Fist. So just like when it was getting good, they canceled it. But anyway, the low rent fight sequences this entire episode were quite frankly embarrassing. Even Papa Red Dagger and Teen Red Dagger, that bloodless kill, talk about also embarrassing. What was the point of these characters? Why couldn't ClanDestine just tell us all this information back in New Jersey? Not that I don't like going to Pakistan, but as I'll say later in this breakdown, maybe they should have saved that for season 2 and maybe done it a little better, right? You don't have, focus on, do one thing well instead of a lot of things mediocre. So anyway, the whole point of Red Dagger in the comics was to show that Pakistan has its own heroes. But here it's done so quickly, and suddenly the Red Daggers are just jinn experts, and people like protectors are supposed to fight the jinn instead of their own thing. So it doesn't really register. You're just like, what? And then you're like, if you're supposed to fight the jinn, why do you seem so inadequately prepared to do so? I guess because none of them had powers up until now. And then everything happened so quickly. They're like, oh, are you a good jinn? Oh, we'll just take your word for it. Awesome. All right, I'd also like to add that while I certainly champion diversity, as you know, having all the groups in the MCU include all ethnicities, we're talking the Black Widows, the Ten Rings, the Eternals, the Egyptian god avatars, and now the ClanDestine, I think robs each group of having a uniqueness to them. I think that I can understand where they're coming from, but this is, again, where Hollywood sometimes, I think, in an effort to do good, actually ends up hurting everything. Because these groups all just become very generic and weak. Where in contrast, the Dora Milaje, they represent the women warriors of Wakanda specifically. You know it as soon as you see a member of the Dora Milaje, and you know things are gonna get awesome. And they're so cool. I don't know why these other groups aren't following that blueprint instead of, again, they all just blend together and they're all pointless. They're all pointless. Then a lot of us are having a hard time imagining how Kamala Khan is going to handle herself in a movie, the upcoming The Marvels, when she can hardly handle herself in her own series. She hardly ever uses her powers. I mean, it was very frustrating this episode. You're like, use your powers! And when she does, it's fleeting, poorly done, and always the same moves. She's quickly becoming less Green Lantern and more armor from the X-Men, and armor never caught on for a reason, because it's not a very cool power set. I also think her origin story is way too complicated, and there's no way it can adequately be explained with just 2 episodes left. Why is there a whole other the Noor dimension? What's the point of that? It just seems pointless. That's how I would describe it. Pointless. What is wrong with her just being a jinn turned superhero? Genies, the authentic kind, existing in the MCU. That's, I think, a cool idea, even though some people have made it clear that would maybe be offensive to some people in the Muslim religion. But from a Western standpoint, I think that's cool, right? The MCU is bending over backwards, though, to put her in the MCU Cosmic alongside her namesake Captain Marvel, like in the comics, although in the comics she was an Inhuman. So that's why that worked, because the Inhumans are also space and Kree-based and all that. And then Marvel shouldn't have changed her powers to put her clearly an MCU mystic. I'm sorry, but Jinn belong alongside sorcerers and witches, and it should be Scarlet Witch showing up instead of Captain Marvel. And quite frankly, Kamala would be better off fan-wise if Wanda were to come over here. Captain Marvel's having a hard enough time as it is. I think now having another character in that group, Ms. Marvel, who's also struggling, what are we doing here? Are you just setting these ladies up to fail? And that's really uncool. Finally, while I think Iman Vellani is Again, absolutely charming. She not only looks like Haley Steinfeld, but she has many of the exact same facial expressions and reactions, and that really should have been considered when casting her, as it keeps Kamala from really being her own unique character with her own story. Because I keep being like, I just saw Kate Bishop back in December. Like, it's so similar. Again, I don't even think they can be on screen together. It's just going to be ridiculous. Okay, as for this episode, as a New Yorker, I have often heard of many people who go back and forth between the United States and South Asia to visit family who still live abroad. So many Americans have one foot in both regions, almost like a double life. And it's a very long trip. It's a very long journey to go there. So people will often go home or to visit relatives for like a month at a time. Yet despite this being the situation for so many Americans, I have never seen it portrayed in mainstream entertainment over here. So I was delighted to finally see it be the focus of today's episode. I was like, that's awesome, that's great. And I don't even think they did that very well. Now, I'm disappointed that this show was actually filmed in and around Bangkok, Thailand, and not actually in Pakistan, with some Getty video files used for establishing shots. You know, they just purchased those. And surely, I think, over the end credits. I think they just bought that from Getty, which is why I talked about that inside joke in the recent episode of The Boys, where they had bought images. Now, while this certainly felt more real than Moon Knight's Egypt sequences, which were filmed in Budapest and Jordan, it still felt cheap here. It still didn't feel totally authentic. And if this show was going to be so focused on Kamala's experience as a Pakistani American, I strongly feel that Marvel should have found a way to actually film in Pakistan. Disney is one of the most powerful countries in the world, with a presence felt globally. I think that even filming in India, close to the Pakistani border, would have been better than what they ended up doing. The end shot, though, where Kamala is thrust back in time after the head of ClanDestine, who I've really come to hate, she's just creepy, strikes Kamala's bangle with a blade. It's like the head of the PTA instead of the head of the ClanDestine. But anyway, when she strikes the bangle, that sends Kamala back in time, and she gets on top of this train. Some shots, it seemed like we were in 1947. Some shots, it did not. But anyway, Kamala's back on top of this train, and they pull out. And it was the best shot of the whole episode. Really strong Dr. Zhivago vibes, which talked about a similar exodus, which happened in Russia with the rise of the communist regime there. But once again, I'm left hoping that the next episode will be better. You're like, this episode was weak, but that end shot, I'll come back next week, sure enough. You have to be careful, though, about taking advantage of your audience's allegiance, because eventually that will not work, as Harry Potter and DC will tell you. All right, but 4 episodes in, we still have no idea what's going on with the bangle. No, nothing. Even the writing on it seemed to be a big 0. They're like, does that mean anything? And the guy's like, probably the person who wrote it. And I'm like, are you kidding me? How Kamala's powers work, or what they're really capable of, and what's going on with her family. That Kamala is still I'm sorry I'm upset about this, but it's really annoying because I really want the show to succeed, and I really like the idea of the show, and I love the characters and a lot of the actors. That Kamala is taking so long to bring her mother into the mix is becoming increasingly frustrating, especially when we learn this episode that her mother left Pakistan because the neighbors were freaked out by her own mother's wacky stories about their past. Kamala's mother is such a kind person who's trying so hard to connect with both her own mother and her daughter. At this point, I think it's cruel that her mother and her daughter are continuing to keep her in the dark, especially when, based on the rules that are being established, Kamala's mother would also have powers, as she's part human, if she were to put on the bangle. She'd better put on that bangle by the end of the show. I'm going to be so upset. Her mother has really earned it. They've really put her mother through the ringer unnecessarily. Also, why didn't anyone think to tell Kamala not to wear jeans when they were leaving the house to go to lunch? That also really bothered me. They should have known the dress code. Also, why would she wear jeans in such a hot environment? You want to wear fabric that breathes. All right, but Kamala sure has a lot of dating options. Wow, one of you tweeted to me, I thought it was very funny, that Kamala is collecting boyfriends like Infinity Stones. More than any other MCU character. But again, just like with her powers, is she ever going to pursue any of these relationships and see what might happen? Like, what's going to go on here? Miss Marvel just overall is stuck in a holding pattern at every level of the show. And we only have 2 episodes left. Part of me feels, as I said, that Pakistan maybe should have been saved for season 2 or a season 2 tease, as it's almost like we're cramming Kamala's entire comic book run, which was substantial, it's still being published, and I think it is, into a, I mean, I think we would have known if it were canceled. I think its readership might be down a little bit, but anyway. Cramming the whole run into a single season, and that's nuts. So those are my frustrated thoughts about Ms. Marvel so far and episode 4. And I'm very curious to hear your thoughts as well down below. It had a real missed opportunity today with Obi-Wan not in the mix to stand on its own. And it had the most dud of an episode, damn it. All right, share your thoughts down below, subscribe today. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.